before time, before creation, before anything we know, who or what existed. Imagine a place where time had no beginning, where there were no stars shining in the sky, nor solid ground beneath our feet. In this vast and infinite nothingness, there was someone. Who would this being be? Who transcends the very concept of existence? This is the mystery that invites us to explore the depth of a truth that challenges our understanding: God. But not a God created by human hands or forged by ancient myths. No, this is the Creator, uncreated, the eternal source of everything that exists. What does it mean to be eternal? How can we, beings limited by time, comprehend a being that had no beginning and will never have an end? Think for a moment. If everything we know has a beginning, then how is it possible that there is something that always was? Can we truly imagine the vastness of an existence that never began? Can we grasp the weight of an eternity that depends on nothing to continue? And if God is the beginning of everything, what does that mean for us, who are so small and finite? How can we, mere creatures of dust, relate to the Creator who sustains the entire universe? What is there in us that caught the attention of this eternal being? These questions draw us into a deeper mystery, a mystery that challenges us to seek more, to understand better, to connect with something beyond ourselves. But before we move forward, we need to ponder, who is God to you? Is He just a distant idea or a real presence in your life? And if I told you that understanding the eternity of God is just the beginning of a journey that leads us to discover the purpose of our own existence? What secrets are yet to be revealed? Stay with me on this journey, for what is to come may completely transform the way you see the world and yourself. From the unfathomable void and deep darkness, a voice was heard. Not an ordinary voice, but the sound of absolute power, of unquestionable authority. "Let there be light," said the Creator, and immediately light was born, cutting through the darkness, establishing the first contrast between day and night. But that was just the beginning. What followed was a masterpiece of creation, a symphony of life and beauty. Imagine in your mind the vastness of the heavens being stretched out, the stars being placed like jewels scattered across an infinite tapestry, the waters parting to form deep oceans, rivers winding through fertile land, mountains rising majestically into the sky, and environments flourishing in vibrant green, covering the earth with life and fragrance. Every detail was carefully designed, every element placed with a purpose, but none of this compared to the culminating moment of creation. On the sixth day, God decided it was time to create something special, something that would be made in His own image. With indescribable intimacy, He formed man from the dust of the earth and then breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul. But God did not stop there. He saw that man needed a companion, someone with whom to share this new and incredible creation. And so, from man's rib, God created woman. Adam and Eve, names that resonate throughout the ages, were the first to experience pure and perfect communion with the Creator. Imagine living in a world without pain, without death, without evil. A place where every step you take is accompanied by the sound of nature in harmony, where the air is pure and peace is the rule. They walked with God in the cool of the day, talking with Him as intimate friends. Their lives were filled with purpose, joy, and a love that knew no bounds. But what happened to that perfect communion? How could something so beautiful and so perfect change? Was the entire creation destined to remain in that state of peace and harmony, or was there something more lurking, something that could change the course of history forever? As we continue to explore this narrative, ask yourself, what if all of this was created for a greater purpose? A purpose that includes you? Could that perfect world still be realized, or is it lost forever? What would you do if you knew that the same God who created the universe also has a plan for your life? A plan that began before you even existed? Stay with me, for the story is just beginning, and what comes next may change the way you understand the world and your place in it. At the center of the paradisiacal garden where Adam and Eve lived, there was more than just beauty and perfection. There was a choice. Amid the abundance of delicious fruits and the splendor of creation, one tree stood out, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it was before this tree that the story took a tragic turn. God had given a clear command. Of all the trees in the garden, they could freely eat, but not from this tree. But why? Why would there be a restriction in a world of total freedom? This question is the first echo of a growing tension, a tension that would culminate in a decision with profound consequences. Then the serpent, cunning and deceitful, entered the scene. With sweet and persuasive words, she sowed doubt in Eve's heart. Did God really say that? Does He really want the best for you? What if eating this fruit could make you like God, knowing good and evil? Eve looked at the fruit, and in her desire to know more, to be more, she gave in to temptation. And it didn't stop there. She gave the fruit to Adam, and together they ate. At that moment, something broke. The perfect communion with God was shattered, and the innocence that covered them was lost. Adam and Eve realized they were naked, exposed, and ashamed. They hid from God. But how could they hide from the Creator who sees everything? How could they flee from the one who had formed them with such love? When God called out to them, it was not in anger but with deep sorrow, like that of a father seeing his children set foot on a dangerous path. "What have you done?" he said, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted them to acknowledge the gravity of what they had done. And at that moment, the curse of sin began in the world. This decision, this single act of disobedience, opened the door to something that was never meant to exist: sin. And with it came suffering, pain, death, and separation from God. What was once a world of harmony and perfection was now tainted by the darkness of evil. But it wasn't just Adam and Eve who would suffer the consequences. Their descendants would inherit this fallen nature, this inclination to sin. And as humanity multiplied, wickedness spread like a poison, corrupting hearts, leading to violence, corruption, and depravity. What began as a simple act of disobedience turned into a wave of destruction that devastated creation. But here arises a crucial question. If the world was created to be perfect, why did God allow sin to enter? Is there a greater purpose behind this? And if so, how does it connect to our own lives and the choices we make every day? The fall was a tragedy, but it was also the beginning of a new story, a story of redemption and hope. Because even in the deepest darkness, God's light does not go out. And this light, as incredible as it may seem, still shines for all those who seek it. So, what comes next? How will God respond to the corruption of His creation? Will He abandon the work of His hands, or will He forge a path to restoration? Stay with me, for the next chapter of this story may hold the key to understanding the destiny of humanity, and yours too. As humanity spread across the earth, the darkness of sin grew like an unstoppable shadow, obscuring the beauty of creation. What had begun with Adam and Eve's disobedience now manifested in widespread wickedness. Violence became the norm, corruption permeated every heart, and the earth was filled with immorality. The creation that had once been called very good was now marred by sin and depravity. But in the midst of this chaos, there was one man who was different, a man who refused to follow the path of evil. Noah, a righteous and blameless man in his generation, found favor in the eyes of God. Imagine In a world engulfed in darkness, a single man shining with the light of righteousness. But what happened next? Could God save creation through just one individual? The answer came in a divine revelation. God, in his justice, decided that he would not allow evil to continue destroying the world he had created. He pronounced a severe but just judgment. The earth would be purified by a flood, a cataclysmic deluge that would destroy all life, except for those saved by him. God instructed Noah to build an ark, a giant ship that would serve as a refuge for him, his family, and pairs of every species of animal. Picture this: Noah, working tirelessly, day after day, under the skeptical and mocking eyes of those around him. Building a ship of such magnitude far from any body of water seemed like madness to everyone except Noah, who trusted in God's word. And then, the day came. The doors of the ark were closed, and the floodgates of heaven opened. The waters rose, covering mountains, sweeping everything in their path. The earth, once vibrant and full of life, was now submerged in a sea of judgment. Noah and his family, holding firmly within the ark, heard the sounds of the flood around them, the roar of the waters, the furious wind, and the eerie silence of destruction. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rains fell incessantly, and the flood covered the entire earth. But while the waters swept away corruption and sin, the ark floated, protecting those whom God had chosen to continue the human and animal lineage. Noah, his family, and the animals within the ark were safe, not by their own strength, but by God's grace. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain ceased, the waters receded, and the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. After months of waiting, dry land finally reappeared, and God, in his mercy, made a new covenant with Noah. He placed a rainbow in the sky as a sign of his promise that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. What does this story teach us about the nature of God? He is just and does not tolerate evil, but he is also merciful and provides a way of salvation for those who seek him. But what about us? Are we living in a world so different from Noah's? Corruption and wickedness still exist around us, and the choice between following God's way or the path of sin is as relevant now as it was then. And what if God, in his infinite wisdom, is calling us to be like Noah in our own generation? Will we have the courage to trust in his word, even when it seems impossible? And what does it mean to live under the promise of the rainbow, knowing that God never fails in his promises? The story of the flood is not just a tale of destruction, but one of hope and renewal. A new beginning for humanity, a reminder that God always makes a way for salvation, even in the darkest of times. But the journey of faith continues, and there is much more to discover about God's purpose for the world and for each of us. What will happen to Noah's lineage? What is God's plan to restore creation? Stay with me, for we are just beginning to uncover the secrets of the divine story. With the flood, the world had been purified, and the story of humanity began anew through Noah's lineage. But God, in his infinite wisdom, had a greater plan, one that would extend through generations, culminating in a promise that would forever change the course of human history. In the midst of a barren and hostile land lived a man named Abraham. He was not a king, nor did he possess immense wealth, but there was something in Abraham that caught God's attention. Perhaps it was his faith, a faith so profound that it defied reason and believed in the impossible. And it was this faith that God chose to be the foundation of an extraordinary promise. Imagine this: Abraham, already advanced in years, is called by God to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he knew. Without a map, without a clear destination, only with the promise that he would be the father of a great nation. A nation so vast that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as countless as the grains of sand on the shore. But there was an apparent problem. Abraham and his wife, Sarah, were old and childless. How could he become the father of a great nation? How could he trust in a promise that, to human eyes, seemed impossible? And yet, Abraham believed. He trusted in God's word, even when everything seemed contrary to logic and reality. And God, faithful to his promise, did the impossible. Sarah, in her old age, conceived and gave birth to a son, Isaac. This child, the heir of the promise, was the beginning of a lineage that would span generations, a people chosen by God to be a light to the nations. But Abraham's story is not just about the birth of a son. God led him on a journey of faith, tests that would prove his love and devotion to the Creator. One of the most profound was God's request for Abraham to sacrifice his own son, Isaac. Imagine Abraham's anguish, the conflict in his heart. God had promised that his descendants would come through Isaac, and now he was asking Abraham to offer his beloved son as a sacrifice. But Abraham, with unwavering faith, obeyed. He took Isaac to Mount Moriah, prepared the altar, and in the final moment, God intervened, providing a ram to be sacrificed in place of Isaac. This story is not just about a test of faith, but about the revelation that God is faithful to his promises, and that he provides a way even when all seems lost. God's covenant with Abraham was sealed, and through his lineage would come a blessing that would extend to all nations. The descendants of Abraham, known as the people of Israel, were chosen to be a set-apart people, a holy nation. But the promise was not limited to them. God promised that through Abraham's lineage, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. What does this mean? And how did this promise unfold throughout history? The story of Abraham teaches us about the importance of faith, even when the path is unclear. It challenges us to trust in God, even when reality seems to contradict his promises. But it also reminds us that God's promises are vast and far-reaching, touching lives beyond our own. So, what does it mean to be a spiritual descendant of Abraham? How do the promises made to him connect with us today? Abraham's journey of faith was just the beginning of a divine plan that extends to the present. And this story, filled with challenges and triumphs, still resonates, calling us to explore what it means to be part of this legacy of faith. As we continue, ask yourself, how could the faith of one man impact the destiny of all humanity? And if God is calling you to a similar journey of faith, how would you respond? What would you do if you knew that God's promises for you are as vast as the stars in the sky? Stay with me, for the story of Abraham is just the beginning of something much greater, something that could change the way you see your own role in God's plan. The story of Abraham is the thread that weaves the fabric of God's plan for humanity. God, in his infinite wisdom and love, chose Abraham to be the patriarch of a lineage that would change the world forever. But why Abraham? And what made his lineage so special that God promised all the nations of the earth would be blessed through it? Abraham, a man of unwavering faith, responded to God's call, leaving everything behind and journeying to an unknown land. But Abraham's journey was more than just a change of address. It was the beginning of an eternal covenant, a covenant that would be passed down from generation to generation, shaping the history of the chosen people. And so, God promised Abraham something extraordinary. His descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the shore. Can you imagine? A promise so vast, so grand, that it transcends time and space. Through Isaac, the child of promise, and then Jacob, Abraham's lineage began to form, giving rise to the 12 tribes of Israel. But what is so special about this lineage? Why did God choose this people to be a light to the nations? The answer lies not only in the fact that Israel was to be a people set apart, consecrated to God, but that through them, salvation would come to all humanity. Abraham did not live to see all the promises fulfilled, but his faith was the foundation upon which God built something much greater. The story of his lineage is marked by highs and lows, moments of glory and trial. Abraham's descendants faced slavery in Egypt, but also witnessed deliverance through Moses. They wandered in the desert but eventually entered the Promised Land, the land God swore to their ancestors. But God's promise to Abraham was not just about a physical land or a specific nation. It was a spiritual promise, a covenant of blessing that would extend to all the nations of the earth. And this promise found its fullest fulfillment in Jesus Christ, the descendant of Abraham, who brought salvation and reconciliation to all, regardless of race or nation. Have you ever considered that through Abraham, God was preparing the way for the redemption of all humanity? That the faith of one man could trigger a plan of salvation that would span centuries and reach us today? And that as heirs of this promise, we too are called to be a light to the world? The story of Abraham's lineage is a powerful reminder that God does not choose the obvious or the strongest, but those who have faith, those willing to follow his call, even when they cannot see the full picture. And just as Abraham was, we are challenged to trust in God, to believe that his promises are true, even when everything around us seems contrary. So what does it mean for us today to be part of this spiritual lineage of Abraham? How can we live in a way that reflects the faith of the one who was called the friend of God? Will we have the courage to trust in God's promises even when the path seems uncertain? As we continue to explore this epic story, remember that the story of Abraham is not just about the past. It is about the present, about your life, and about how God desires to use you to continue the work he began thousands of years ago. The promise to Abraham is alive and active, and his lineage, both physical and spiritual, continues to be a blessing to the world. And now, the question is, how will you respond to this divine call? The Patriarchs. The patriarchs are central figures in the biblical narrative, especially in the book of Genesis. They are the ancestors of the nation of Israel, and their lives and actions are fundamental to the development of the story of God's chosen people. Abraham, the first patriarch, was chosen by God to be the father of a great nation. The divine promise to Abraham included the guarantee of a land, numerous descendants, and the blessing of all nations through his lineage. His son, Isaac, became the second patriarch. Isaac's life was marked by the continuation of the promises made to Abraham. He lived a life of faith, obeying God and maintaining his father's legacy. Jacob, Isaac's son, became the third patriarch. His life was full of challenges, but it was through him that God fulfilled the promise of making Abraham the father of a nation. After an encounter with God, Jacob was given the name Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. He had 12 sons, who became the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 sons of Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, formed the foundation of the Israelite nation. Each tribe played a significant role in shaping the identity and destiny of Israel, with some, like Judah, standing out in the Messianic history. The story of the patriarchs is, therefore, the narrative of the beginning of the formation of a people destined to be a light to the nations, carrying with them the promises and purpose of God for humanity.